If you're new here, my name is RuthAnn. My husband Lance was a service-connected, disabled U.S. Navy veteran. He was sick for 25 of the 27 years we were together, and for the last 12 years of his life, I was his full-time caregiver. This podcast is about caregiving in all its forms. I'm here with my friends Kevin and Allison. Again, this is our third episode in this series on disability and advocacy. And today we're going to talk about some of the challenges of having a child with multiple disabilities. Thanks for being here, Kevin and Allison.
Thank you.
Thanks, RuthAnn.
Well, let's start off with school. Can you tell me some of the challenges that you faced finding the right school for Jameson?
This is a complicated question for us. We shared a little bit in an earlier episode when we lived in Idaho and Jameson went to a public school, how we realized partway in that they had been violating state and federal law by isolating him in a disability and other disabled students at a particular school rather than allowing him to attend the neighborhood school, and by giving him opportunities to interact with non-disabled students in the classroom. And in many ways, because that was a public school, once we realized what they were doing and we downloaded the state special education manual and we learned how it was based in federal law, that was in many ways pretty easy for us to push back, because it was clear that what we were doing, what the school was doing was illegal. And then once we started talking about that in public, they had very strong incentive to change. When we moved to Michigan, we moved here so that I could take a position at a Christian university. The Christian university actually started in the area as a way of training pastors and teachers for a Dutch immigrant community in here. So there's a long history of my university having close connections with private Christian schooling. And so the expectations at the time were that faculty would send their kids to private Christian schools, because that was, again, the long history.
And they would also help pay for the Christian school, so the private school as well.
So when I was offered the job, before I would accept it, I knew that technically private schools don't have to do anything. Private schools can deny somebody admission simply because they're disabled. And so we got an exception so that they wouldn't, if we couldn't find a local Christian school that was willing to work with us for Jameson, that they wouldn't, like, I wouldn't lose my job because he couldn't go to one. And my university actually gave us an exception for the other girls as well. So like, if you can't find one a school that's good to be good for your son, none of your kids have to go. But we did find a local Christian school when he was in elementary school that was a pretty good experience. It wasn't perfect, but early on, they worked with us. They had a pretty long history of having a range of different sorts of disabilities in the school.
They really wanted him. I remember they almost kind of like were pushing us like to have more kids with disabilities in the school. So they wanted the demographic of the school to be representative of the demographic of the area. So like they wanted so many like minorities and kids with disabilities. They wanted it to be kind of like a good demographic, or a very broad demographic. Mm-hmm. So they kind of were like almost recruiting us in a sense. They really wanted us there. And that was kind of what took us, because we were supposed to interview at 3 schools. We interviewed at 2, and we liked this one so much we didn't even go to the 3rd interview, because we really liked the programs they were offering and their willingness and really desire to have Jameson there.
So, again, it wasn't perfect, but his elementary experience was on the whole really good. He had friends. He would get invited to birthday parties. Sometimes if they had a field trip, one of us would go, not because we had to, even though we felt like we kind of needed to make sure that he was getting as much out of it as he can. Moved to middle school, And as he got older, as some of the intellectual gaps between Jameson and his non-disabled peers got bigger, as puberty hit, as the pandemic hit, and the way that we all went online for a few, for a year, and that was really hard for him. He does not interact well via Zoom or Skype or this kind of stuff.
Phone calls, yeah, he's not.
So that was really bad. So when we came back from after the pandemic, it was just clear that stuff was a lot more complicated.
It started getting complicated in 4th grade,
Yeah.
but like it was more, he would get frustrated, he would knock like some pencils over, that sort of thing. As it got middle school, he would then start to run and scream when he would get frustrated or not know what's going on.
His brain sort of goes into a fight or flight mode. And so if the demands are put to, and he feels unsafe, he would just, kind of like, and it wouldn't last for super long. He wasn't a big elopement risk. But as the kids got older, as what, 6th, 7th graders wanted to do was different from what Jameson was interested in, when the gap between what he was learning and what they were learning increased, it just kept getting more and more complicated.
And his body was changing, and I think not knowing what's going on and trying to explain to a 6th grader about hormones and, why your body is doing this, and your mind just hasn't caught up yet. It's really, that part, it's difficult with typical kids. So trying to explain that to Jameson was difficult as well.
So it was all getting more complicated, and it was getting more complicated in our lives at home too. But while it was getting more complicated, the school then became less and less interested in working with us on the complications. He had moved from the elementary school to the middle school. They had gotten some new staff, so staffing decisions changed around. The person that oversaw him at the elementary school then started overseeing the whole district, so wasn't directly involved with him in the middle school. We had a new person. And there was, in addition to the ways in which he got more complicated, there was just a less and less willingness to work with us on those complications and to understand what was going on. And so the school had what they were used to doing, and they no longer became very interested in trying new things for us with him. And so that got super complicated year after year after year. And the end of his 8th grade year was just kind of a disaster. I was on a camping trip with one of our daughters for a school field trip. And sometimes when Jameson would go into this mode, we would get called like, he's not behaving, you need to come get him. And so Allison got the phone call to go pick him up on one of these days. We knew that every time they asked us to come pick him up, this was technically a suspension. They didn't like it because if we said that he was being suspended, it sounded mean. They're like, no, it's not. No, legally, this is a suspension. So she went to pick him up.
It did take me a while. So I was doing some personal training at a gym. So I was like getting ready to train, and I could not leave there until, I don't know, I think it was like 10:30. And we got the call pretty early in the day. So I was like, well, I have to train this, and I will be in there. Like, I'm going to try to be there by 11, if I remember the timing correctly.
So when she got there, the front door staff knew us. They would buzz us in, and we would just go back to where in the school he was.
It was lunchtime. So I remember calling you right before I went in. It was lunchtime. I was walking back to the areas. There's a couple rooms that they have back there that he would go, like there's a sensory room and a room that they would work with the kiddos one-on-one. So I went back there, and one of the lights was on because I remember having to go through all the kids going to lunch, and one of the lights was on, and I looked in the window and I didn't see him in there. And then I went in the sensory room, and there were like 6th graders in there playing. So he wasn't in there. So then I walked back I walked to his locker. I was checking it. I'm like, well, maybe they'll have all of his stuff up front, looking all over for him. I'm probably walking around there for like 5-10 minutes because I looked in classrooms and I couldn't find him. Kind of walked around the school, couldn't find him. And then I see a girl come out of one of the classrooms and walk into the room that I had looked in initially that had the light on, but I didn't see anybody in there. And as soon as she opened the door, I hear wailing. And like, so I was like, oh. And so I realized it was Jameson, and she was in there like checking on him. And I went in and he was in the corner of the room sobbing, like sobbing. His shirt was wet, but he was like laying on the floor sobbing. And I'm looking around and I'm like, I see nobody. Like this kid was just like, oh yeah, they asked me to check on him. And I was like, okay. But like there was an adult in that classroom. So it was lunchtime. So they're just eating in their classrooms. But like the teacher was gone, you know, whatever. So again, I'd been there for like 10 minutes by this point. And so I get him, I go to his locker and I grab his stuff. And when I'm walking out, I'm following the lunch people out because they're already done. And I see no one the whole time.
So most of the time, Jameson has an aide with him in school. So she was there in the building for at least 15 minutes, never saw the aide, never had somebody that like...
Didn't even see an adult.
He was
like,
shut in a room by himself, snot dripping down his face, tears everywhere.
And so I walked out, and this was like the second to last day of school, maybe, or like there might have been 2 more days left. And I went to the front desk as I'm leaving, and I was like, I'm taking him. He will not be back to school the rest of this year. You can have Sarah call me. That was the principal at the time. And then I walked out of the school and got him in the car. And then I either called or texted you and said, he was in a room sobbing for 15 minutes on his own before I even like got to
at least 15
minutes. Sobbing. And I'm like, there was nobody there. I walked around the school looking for an aide. The only adult people I saw were the people doing lunch, and they had nothing to do with him. And the fact that I followed the lunch ladies out does have like ends up having part of the story. But like when I texted him and I was sobbing and Jameson sobbing. And so then he ends up texting the person in charge of
inclusion, in charge of special ed.
And just saying, you know, Allison was just there, you know, nobody was there. She wasn't there. She was on a field trip. She was up there with you, wasn't she? Or she was on her way back?
Yeah, she wasn't up there.
Okay,
I think she was on her way back.
But the principal was out and she was out, and I don't even remember her response to you exactly, but just that like the aide was, Jameson wouldn't be left alone. The aide went to go get lunch for Jameson, which again, that's fine, except when I was following the lunch people out, they were closing up and there was nobody there with a lunch for Jameson, right? So like, I believe there was a lie told in there, or a falsehood on her part or on the aide's part that was supposed to be watching him.
And even if the person did go to get lunch, they should have and if Jameson wanted to be left alone, and if he wants to be left alone, like we should leave him alone. But like,
be outside the door, be in
no
the room next door. They were nowhere.
So I was just like, we need to know what's going on. And so I texted this to the folks in charge. I think it was 2 days later. We hadn't heard anything back. It was the day of 8th grade graduation. And so I called again or texted again or emailed again or something. And I was just like, is there a plan for him to be included in the 8th grade graduation ceremony tonight? And, you know, one of his friends came up with this plan. We're wondering what this might look like. And they had given no thought to what it was. Had we not initiated it, he would have probably missed his 8th grade graduation. And even the way that it was done, I mean, he's got all kinds of social interactions, anxiety, right? That he had to, our last name is near the end of the alphabet. They had to wait until the very, you know, towards his name gets called.
Well, his friend also that was going to walk with him across the stage is even further at the end of the alphabet. And so they were waiting to walk him with her. Hers begins with a W. So like they were at the very end. So he had to wait the whole time instead of like maybe going first. So he didn't have to wait and wait and wait and wait. they went at the end, and he refused to go. So I had to walk up there with him and walk across the 8th grade stage, because he refused to walk with his friend by this point, because he's frustrated and upset and, just tired of being there. So I ended up walking with him instead.
So that was the end of his 8th grade year. And as awful as that was, it's actually better than almost his entire 9th grade year. So then he goes to the high school. And it was just, and we'll try to spare a lot of the details, but it was clear that the school, and this was again, a new person in charge of inclusion at the high school that we hadn't worked with before. It was clear what she was used to doing with families. My other families want to do this. We've got some other disabled students. One of the things they love is like being connected to the basketball team. Jameson has no interest in sports. So this other student is like the manager of the basketball team. And so one of his classes is to like get the equipment ready. And so we teach him how to do laundry. I'm like, Jameson's going to have no interest in doing this. That is not what one of his academic classes is supposed to be. And so this person was not willing to do what they weren't used to doing. They weren't willing to take advice from us. We tried to get a local nonprofit that I was on the board from involved to help do this, but because the school was a client of the nonprofit, that all got really, really complicated. And the year just fell apart the longer it went. And so
it did not help that at home, my dad was also declining. So he was 92 years old. And by January, February, he was really starting to decline.
He was on hospice care in our house.
But at the end of, basically mid-February on, he was in hospice care. So we had stuff going on at home too. So, and they were aware of this. But things just progressively got worse. It was interesting. They called us on a Tuesday when he had a very good day, the principal, and was talking to you, and you of course recorded it. But he was talking to you, and Jameson had a good day. He's like, but we need to talk about other things. And we're like, okay, like, what do we need to talk about? He's had this good day, whatever. That very next day he had a bad day. And they're like, we need to have a meeting. I believe we had the meeting.
It was a day or two later.
Well, so I think this was like on Wednesday. They were like, yeah, we need to have a meeting on Monday. We're going to have a meeting. And we're like, okay. My dad passed away on Friday. And again, they knew, because we told them that day my dad is in hospice, all this stuff. And then on Monday, which they did not know that my dad had passed away, they're like, oh, by the way, Jameson, we're going to finish out the school year, but he is not welcome to come back next year.
So they invited us in, the superintendent, the principal, the director of inclusion, all these folks. They just said the kind of support that he needs, what it would take to work with you to figure out a good environment. The whole time we were talking, we're like, you always tell us behavior is communication, right? And he's feeling unsafe. He is responding in certainly problematic way, right? But it's a response to what's going on. And so like, can we try these things? They had like 4 or 5 different aides working with him. We're like, we think that if he had one person that was consistent, one of the aides would often like put their arm around Jameson, and he does not like physical touch by people he doesn't know. And we'd see him flinch. We're like, this needs to stop. So they weren't willing to do all these small things that we asked for. We get called into this meeting and they're like, we're going to finish out the school year, but he's not allowed back. And we were told that they did not have the resources to serve him. And since it's a nonprofit private school, I had looked up their tax forms. And I said, you have $87 million in assets beyond liabilities. You have the resources. We were sitting in the conference room in the football stadium that overlooked their football field. Like you're just not willing to work with us and spend these resources. And so they kicked him out. The rest of the year, they did make some of the changes to try to
figure. They gave him one aide, a single aide. And it was not the touchy-feely aide. And if you know anything about autistics, they don't like physical touch. So this aide that was doing this, like he should have been trained properly and clearly was not. And we had heard, and I believe this is actually true, that the prior year he was the janitor at the school. So that is,
because it's a private school, they don't have the same regulations, so you don't have to have any kind of certification or training in the way that you would to be a paraprofessional in a private or in a public school.
He was being super nice. It was never like he was intentionally doing it, but he was like, "See you later, buddy," you know, and kind of like a good boy, like, "See you later." And I'm like, which I think is problematic anyway, but with a child with autism, it's a no-no. And that it should have been told to this person. There was like zero training of the parapros in terms of how to deal with kids with disabilities. So
they've made some of these changes. Stuff actually got better. They, in the meeting, when they said he wasn't able to attend, they'd actually said, unless we see significant improvement. And so as the next few months kept getting better, I would ask, like you said, we could revisit the decision to expel him if there's significant improvement. What is significant improvement? I kept asking this question. They would never give us an answer. And then eventually the superintendent said we were never reconsidering.
No.
And so we found out that the school district he had gone to for 8 years was just not willing to take him. And so we then had to, over the course of that summer, decide where he was going to go for his 10th grade year. We looked into a couple of the other local private Christian schools. 3 of them would also not take him. And so we enrolled him in our public school that he would go to because A, they have to take him, and B, there's legal protections of how they interacted with him. His 9th grade year at this public school was significantly better, but
10th
not,
grade.
sorry, no, 10th grade was significantly better because of legal protections, but not perfect. We were told 2 days before school started this year for his 11th grade year that they'd gotten all new staff. They just hadn't told anybody. And so he had a 3rd in 3 years batch of all new staff working with him. But this year has been the best of those 3.
Yep.
Because our middle daughter was also, or middle child, a daughter was leaving 8th grade this past year. She didn't want to attend the school that would not take him. So she transferred from the private Christian school to the public school where he goes to, which caused her to have to start over her friend group all from scratch. And again, we were talking with her about this. She had a birthday party last week and invited some of her friends from her old school. We're like, do you regret this? She's like, I miss the people, but I would not go to that school. I could not go there. And so this was a huge impact on him. It was horrible on us. It's affected our kids. And so I've actually now written I got a paper coming out in a law journal arguing against arguing that the religious institutions should not retain the right to discriminate on the basis of disability in the way that they currently can.
Or shouldn't, because, if they're Christian.
So the school experience for us has been
started out great
and got worse and worse and worse and worse until it was clear that the people that had promised to walk with us through his graduation. And when stuff got hard, we were abandoned by the very same people that just leveraged religious language for their own protection.
Mm-hmm. So much of what you're saying, I didn't deal with. I don't have any children, and so I never dealt with anything having to do with children, but dealing with disability in general, it just seemed like there were so many one-size-fits-all solutions to everything that we dealt with. And that was one of the biggest challenges that I faced.
Yeah, what Jameson needed for his disabilities and his autism was not the same thing that other autistics at the school needed, because kids are different. Instantiations of autism are different. He's got further disabilities that some of them didn't have. And so there was clear that they were willing to do some things, but not others. And when our family became too difficult, they were just done with us.
I'm really sorry for all the things that you've had to deal with. Just in addition to having a child with multiple disabilities and then all of the other life things that happen around that, it just seems really unfair. And I'm very, very sorry.
Thank you. It sucks.
Have you worked with teachers and administrators to try and make sure that he's integrated rather than isolated? And how has that changed throughout the years?
And again, it started out well, with again, kids, most times kids are very open, especially young kids are very open. It did get worse as he got older. And then even as we saw that some of these things were happening, and this is something that we don't love about his school now, we keep talking about how he is very isolated. And I will admit, Jameson does not make it easy to be, because he doesn't interact super well with people. So like, again, he likes to play alongside you, but maybe not with you. So he doesn't make it like warm and fuzzy, come be my friend. So he doesn't make it easy. But I don't know that the school necessarily tries super hard to work with us on that. So
when he was younger, he was typically in the gen ed classroom. He would have an aide as needed. As the gap between his academic function and his non-disabled peers' academic function grew, right? He had differentiated instruction. He would be pulled out of the classroom for speech and OT and physical therapies and all this kind of stuff. But the longer he's been in school, the less he's in with non-disabled peers. When he moved to the public school he's in now, he's actually in a cognitive impairment program. And so the two classes where he is with non-disabled peers are art and PE. So all his academic instruction is in the cognitive impairment program. The non-disabled students that are in his art and his PE classes aren't taking them for art and PE. They're volunteering as peer mentors. And so the dynamic is very, very different. And so we are continuing to push the school on, he's isolated. He comes home and he'll tell us, I bet close to every day, that we're his best friends. And I love this, but it also is heartbreaking that outside of our family, I don't know that our 17-year-old has friends, right? He's not been invited to any outside of school stuff since homecoming, his first year at this, and where a bunch of his classmates were going to go have dinner. Some of the peers in his cognitive impairment program were going to go to dinner together at a restaurant and then go to the dance. And these are the sorts of things that Jameson would not have any interest in doing. And so he didn't go. So his social isolation has just grown massively as he's gotten older, both inside of school and outside of school.
One, I was talking to Kevin about this the other day, like a lot of other kids are having their, graduation open houses and parties and stuff like that. And I told him, I said, I don't know if anybody would come to Jameson's part. Like, I wouldn't even know who to invite to, a graduation party, like our friends, but even our friends are sort of like, we've talked about how we don't have a lot of a social life. So I don't, and like, family, our families are 3 to 5 hours away. Would they come? I don't know. So it's like, do we even have a graduation open house for him next year? I don't know. Because I don't want to have this party and then nobody show up. Right. Like, and let's say we do have this party and people show up. Jameson is not the one to want to party. So he's not going to come around and say, thank you for coming and like chit chat with you. He's going to want to sit in here and play Play-Doh. So it's sort of like that one, that was really heartbreaking for me, thinking about having we would get announcements for our friends that are, kids are graduating. I'm like, do we do this? I don't know. I don't know how to navigate having a graduation party for our son. So,
And even as some of his peers then will also graduate, and I'm sure we'll get invited to some of those, right? Are we getting invited because we're friends of their kid, or is Jameson getting invited? And I bet at most, Jameson specifically is invited to two.
yep.
And these are the two folks from his previous school that still sometimes stick around, right? And next year it'll have been 10 years here. And he might only have two people out of a decade that invite him to their graduation parties. And what that would mean for him having his own, like, we don't know. We don't want to throw a party that he's not going to enjoy. But if we don't have it, then are we depriving him of this opportunity because of his disability? Right? So it's like navigating this, even for us, is really, really complicated. He, even though he's not going to graduate with a diploma, he deserves to be celebrated too. But how do we get people that have largely all just dropped away and not valued him over the last decade to recognize that what he has accomplished, which is very different than what their kids have accomplished, deserves to be celebrated too?
Do you have any advice that you could offer to other people about navigating school if they've got a child with a disability or with multiple disabilities?
IDEA is your friend, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
For now.
For now. Each state has their own slightly different instantiation of that. So find out what the local one is, and it is your friend. It is the crowbar by which you get leverage. Get all communication from the school in writing, if possible. If you live in a state where it is legal to record phone conversations with schools without letting them know that you're doing it, do that. Not because I think that schools can't be trusted, but we have had numerous schools admit to us that they have done things that are just flat out illegal. And if we don't have documentation, then we don't have any leverage. And so you don't want to have to be a jerk, but if the only way to get your child the protections and the opportunities that they're supposed to have is to be a jerk, then be a jerk.
And I feel like sometimes, like, I don't have a lot of advice because I don't know that I did it right. Like, so, and I don't, even in hindsight, I'm like, I don't know what I would have done differently. But I don't know that I would have done things the same way. So I feel like, again, I'm sort of not great at giving advice on some of this, because again, each kid is going to be different and each school district is going to be different, and you're going to have a lot of schools that are a lot more open, and you're going to have a lot of schools that are even less. So, and again, I feel like things have progressed from when I was in school. But they have not progressed enough in 40 years, 30 years. I don't know how long ago I was in school. They have not progressed enough. But I don't know that I have a lot of advice. So,
I mean, parenting is hard enough. All of this just makes it so much harder. And so because it's hard and individualized and unclear, the opportunity for self-doubt and second guessing is replete.
Yeah.
There is probably no way to quantify the ways in which we feel fragile, or maybe that we've just screwed everything up because of doing what we thought was best at the time, but not knowing whether or not it was.
Yeah.
And so navigating those feelings when you have the social isolation that we've talked, like those two problems compound each other.
Well, we've talked a little bit about the social isolation. Do you want to expand on that anymore? How having a child with a disability has affected your social relationships for the two of you and for your entire family?
I mean, I think our girls still get invited to a lot of stuff, but we always wonder, are they, right? Like, looked at kind of strange, or people not friends with them because their brother's a certain way. And especially as Emmeline has switched schools, we don't know if that's happened. There, I'm sure, are like whole family get-togethers, right? Where it's not just like them being invited to stuff, but like all of our families to get together. I mean, those have decreased substantially in the time that we've been here. So
I really only know one person, maybe two, like Joanna and Jen. Like those are the people that I can think of that invite us to like whole family sort of things.
Debbie and Gerald do. We get together with them.
That's right.
So there are a few, right? But like they're few and far between.
Yeah.
But those people that keep us in there, like they understand our complexity and the messiness of it all, but there's just not a whole lot of it. And so there's social isolation for us, there's social isolation for Jameson, maybe for the girls, and then for us as a whole family group.
So how do you deal with that then?
Get used to being alone.
Like I don't know that there's not a happy answer here. There's a lot of sorrow and a lot of loneliness.
Yeah.
And that's where we steep.
Yeah.
We're like old tea bags.
They get bitter the longer they steep, it seems, right?
So.
Right? That's a really good analogy.
Allison, when we had a conversation a few weeks ago, you mentioned that you hadn't seen a sermon in years because you were so focused on Jameson. So how has this affected your being able to go to church?
I mean, a lot. So it was already hard. So we were going to church, and we also were taking my dad, who was disabled, as well. So it was a challenge. And then once we were there, it's like the kids were in with us. The church we go to, like the kids only go to Sunday school, like up to like second grade.
They only go to their own worship up through second grade. So third on up, stay with their parents during the entire worship service.
And basically Jameson was in third grade when we came, right?
Yeah. So he's always been
in the service with us. And they have little bags like that have, activities or coloring or whatever. And so it just seemed like the whole time I'm drawing Mickey Mouses or drawing A's or cutting out things, or just like that I only would hear part of the sermon, and like, I think this went for you as well. It wasn't just me. Like, so we would tag team because he would sit with me for a while, then he would sit with Kevin. And so it was really difficult. And I think when we were in Idaho, I think I had talked about how they were working towards, they hadn't gotten there quite yet, but they were working towards having an aide or somebody in Sunday school,
a professional therapist
with the kids. And again, Jameson was young enough when we were there that it wasn't horrible for him to be in, like, there. He wasn't super hard to have in class. And so like we would sit through sermons and it would be good, and so once we moved here, and there may be other churches that had stuff, I don't know. And our church is very open, and like they're not super bad at like looking at us like, oh, why can't you keep your kid quiet? There are some people, you have your people who are like annoyed with him chattering, but most of the people aren't. However, it did not help us to have him in there because we couldn't really participate in the service.
The people that sat around us like understand that he engages in echolalia, so he says the same thing over and over sometimes, or repeats back. He's not great at whispering. He's going to knock the crayons out of the box 15 times, right? So like the folks around us, once they got to know us, never made us feel bad. But we're also trying not to be the people that drop the crayon box the 16th time. And so as he got older, you've got fewer and fewer opportunities. Like when he was at our church in Idaho in first grade, right? It's pretty easy to have a disabled first grader like coloring the entire time. But when you've got somebody who's 5 feet tall and can't sit still and his body wiggles and just right? And he became more and more aware of how he didn't sort of fit in. Church just became kind of behavior management, where we were always trying to not make him not be allowed to be who he is, but trying to mitigate the social context. And so it just became really hard. And so, the pandemic made this worse. He's so bad at Zoom. When we did like Zoom church, we wouldn't make him be involved. A lot of the activities that would happen after the main service, like, the 2 hours there for worship was about all he could handle. And so we wouldn't stay for the potlucks and, so then, especially after her dad died, like it just became kind of not worth it to try to navigate this.
Not to mention, I became bitter. I'm not going to lie. So between my dad, like, we didn't get a ton of support. Like, the church did come, our pastor came. She was great when my dad was going through some stuff. But like, we didn't have a whole lot of other people from the church supporting us. And then for our Christian school to have done what they did to Jameson at the very same time that's we're going through this stuff with my dad, I just became like, if this is Christianity, this is not what I want to be a part of, right? Like, and I think a lot of people go through that. Like, there was just not that community, like, support from Christians. And so I just was like, I'm tired. I'm tired of this. So I don't think I've been to church since my dad died.
There are a lot of people that go to our church that send their kids to the same district that kicked Jameson out. And some folks would express their sorrow that this is what happened. But then we're like, can the church like write a letter? Can they, just like make the theological case that this is wrong? And nobody did. And so now, and especially like Jameson needs the weekends to reset because the school dynamics are all really hard. And so we just, when we go, one of us stays home, and it's usually Allison. Sometimes we all stay home, but then we, like when I go and I still read scripture or offer the prayers or in the liturgist sometimes, then it's, do we make the girls go? They're teenager and preteens. They don't always want to go. Sometimes they do. If Jameson doesn't have to go, why do I have to go? And so like, either we go as a split family in some version or other, which is sad, or we just sometimes don't go at all. And so and when we do go, there are a couple of folks that whenever I'm there, we haven't seen Allison in so long, they always ask about her. And again, I'm glad that they ask, but it also just makes us feel awful. Because we haven't figured out a way for us as a whole family to feel like that's where we should be.
Yeah. And again, it sort of became a cost benefit analysis in terms of going to church. I'm like, what is the cost? And like, what is the benefit that I'm getting here? Because it wasn't a benefit in a sense. Like, I didn't feel community because I couldn't really talk to other people. I didn't feel like I was part of the service, or like worshiping. So like, there wasn't that. And so it just came to the point where I have to get up early in the morning, get the kids dressed and ready to go, get them out the door, all of this stuff, to then just sit there and color or like draw or try to keep my child quiet during the service. And I'm like, what am I getting from this? There is no like benefit in a sense. And so it just came really like not worth it anymore.
So we still, the girls and I still sometimes go, and we've started sort of a small church group via Zoom in the evenings with some folks that she grew up with. And so we try to get some spiritual connection that way.
Mm-hmm.
But church has also become another part of our lives where we feel like outsiders or outside the circle or on our own or whatever the description you want to insert here is.
Do you think that had you stayed in Idaho, that you may feel differently because of the community of support that you had there?
I don't know. It's hard to say because, again, because all these disabilities, manifest themselves differently. Would the people that Jameson was close to while we were there be close, and the church, I don't know how, I don't know how it is now. I don't know if they ever did get that therapist in, if that ever was a priority. Like, I don't know the answer to that. So it could be, but there were also some other people from our community. We were talking about our friends, Sarah and Stephen, like they also moved away from that community and they were a big part of our lives there. So I don't know. And it's hard to say.
There's a pretty robust literature that churches are often complicated for disabled folks. But churches in general tend to do better with disabled children than disabled adults. When most churches think about ways in which they exclude disabled folks, they think about starting a disability ministry for kids. And so it's hard to know because the social dynamics have changed, the church might have changed, but also as Jameson's gotten older, it's just what it looks like to have intellectually disabled autistic second grader is different than what it looks to have an intellectually disabled autistic 18-year-old. So we don't know if church would be different if we were still in Idaho.
Is there anything that the churches could do to be more inclusive?
Our church has asked that question a number of times. It feels like sometimes we're supposed to be the one that comes up with the answer. And in a sense, we're the ones that know most what he needs. So I get that, but also we don't know what he needs, we don't know how to do this.
And then even if we did, like, would they follow through with that? Would they have the funds to follow? Maybe they need, aides or teachers or whatever. But like, I don't know what the church, so I understand that they're wanting to know from us, but like, are they willing to do it when we tell them? Because that was something that the school was not willing to do when we told them what we needed. And so that's like, do we put all this work in for them to not then do what we ask? And I realize if you don't ask, you won't get anything, but it's just one of those. And I don't know, I don't know what the best way to go forward is or what we need. So again, it's hard. This is where I feel very inadequate or very, that I just don't know what to do or what the next steps are or the right steps are.
And often what we need from the church most isn't, what are we going to do for that hour and a half on a Sunday morning? It's, are they going to go to bat for us when the school that they've got a 100-year relationship with excludes our family?
Yeah.
Like, if we really matter, then buck up and work for us. We need the lawyers in the church that are willing to give us legal advice about what sorts of legal options we have with respect to his expulsion. And so the way in which we often think, oh, what families with disabilities need are just this hour and a half. Again, I don't think that we did stuff perfect caring for you and Lance in Idaho, but I remember this, right? Like, you needed to change your deck. And you know what some of us did is we showed up and we tore out the old one and we helped rebuild a new one, right? Like, that was church. It wasn't necessarily just, is there a space for you to sit next to us at Sunday school? Though I hope we did that too. Did we not give you grief when you came late because it was hard to get Lance in the accessible van? But where's the church walking alongside us the whole part of our life and not just these little bits?
Not just Sunday mornings,
Yeah.
Not just Wednesday nights, whatever. Yeah, there were times that I felt like we really needed the church that they didn't show up, and they knew and didn't show up.
Yeah, I will say that church is the only church that we attended where we felt included and we felt supported and we felt loved. it is uncommon to find that type of support. I think the church that I go to now, although I'm not dealing with disability, they do have a community where they support adults with disabilities, and they have various events that they put on for the adults with disabilities. So I see a lot more happening in the church that I'm in. But besides the church in Idaho and the church that I'm at now in Arkansas, I don't know of any others. So, and it's really sad because it is something that should, I believe, start in the church. That's what Christianity is.
And I thought that you felt that way, but I also know that people can think somebody feels that way and they don't. Right? So there's probably lots of folks at our church that think we feel really supported. And so I'm glad that we succeeded in making you feel not just welcome, but that you mattered and were valued. Because again, that's what so often, there are lots of places we go where we think we're tolerated. But lots of the places where we think we're tolerated, we don't feel valued.
Or included.
We don't feel like he's valued. We want you to value not just us, not just our wonderful girls.
Yeah.
But if he's not valued, something's wrong. We are just a bunch of downers.
No, you're not. You know, I know that it's different what I lived through, but I can relate to so much of this. And, you know, we were so isolated. As much as we felt the love and the support from our Sunday school group, and there were a lot of people who came alongside us and walked through many years of that journey with us, we were still incredibly isolated, and we spent 95% of our life alone.
And even though you don't think that we're downers, like a lot of the other folks do think that we're downers. And there's ways in which, I mean, we have talked about horrible school experiences, social experiences, church experiences. And like when this is so much of our life,
Yeah.
then if people want to know what our life is like and we tell these stories, like we are not, at least I'm not, the life of a party, because this is also my professional life. This is what I think about, how to make our communities better. And so,
and maybe that, like, we haven't found a lot of friends that are willing, like they're great with us when everything's going great, but like once you start to talk about the things that are difficult in your life, they're not the people that stick around for that. So,
which is hard because you're dealing with a lot of difficulties and you can't live your life ignoring all of those things just to make everybody else comfortable. I know that you as a family do some traveling. I do still watch on social media to see what kinds of exciting things you're doing. And I know that travel can still be a challenge. It was when I was caring for Lance, but it was also for me the time when I felt most normal, because you're not really supposed to fit in when you're out traveling somewhere where you don't belong. So for me, that was where I felt like I belonged. So traveling was really, really important for me. Can you tell me a little bit about what travel is like for you as a family, especially dealing with a son with multiple disabilities and having to deal with some of the accommodations?
Again, this has changed over the course of his life. There have been times in the past where my parents would fly out to Idaho and watch the kids for a week so that Allison could go on a trip with me to Austria or wherever. But as he's gotten older, as we try to travel with as a family, and we do want him to have the opportunity to do all this kind of stuff, it has just gotten, more complicated. I had a fellowship at Oxford, so when he was 2.5, we lived in England for a year. Emmeline was 3 months old when we left, right? And we could do that because we didn't have to worry about school. We didn't have to worry about other kinds of stuff. 2 summers ago, I had a conference in Spain, and we decided to take the entire family for a 2-week vacation to Spain and to France. When I was doing the work part of stuff, Allison then had to navigate a different city and a different language, on her own. And that was tricky. Our youngest is in a Spanish immersion program, so she could help with the language part.
Yeah.
But he gets, and we took the whole family to New York City for 5 days this spring for spring break. So we still do some of that, but he doesn't have the stamina, right? So like, you can get really exhausted just walking around, even not trying to do too much in Barcelona or in New York City. So we always have to pay attention to, when's he going to need breaks? Is this kind of experience going to be overwhelming? Is it going to just be too much sensorily? And as he's gotten older, we've gotten more attuned to what this looks like. Yeah. And we're, I think, better at making accommodations when they're needed before we wait too long.
And he's better at telling us when he's done too. Yep. Kind of like, I don't want to.
But it also means that sometimes we have to divide and conquer. So there were a couple of days when we were in New York that in the, we'd get up, we'd have breakfast, we'd roll out, 9 or 10 and go do some sightseeing. By 2:00, he's like, I want to go to a playground, or I want to go back to the hotel and rest.
Yeah.
So then we're like, do we make everybody stop?
Because we didn't want the girls to miss out on things that they like to do and wanted to do. So we would often like, all right, it's Kevin's turn to go back to the hotel with Jameson. I will take the girls. It worked out because I took them up on the high buildings that Kevin's a little afraid of heights. So he doesn't do heights well. So I took them up in the buildings, and, we went on a cupcake tour, but like, I felt bad because I'm like, Jameson's missing out on this cupcake tour, which I think he would have enjoyed, but like we walked from each place. And so it was like, okay, at least a half mile between some of the places. And so I just think he was already spent that day. So I don't know that he would have enjoyed it. And then it kind of takes away from the enjoyment of the girls if we're trying to like cater to his every little need. Like, okay, he's having a little fit here. And I think they get a little frustrated sometimes when it's like, well, when is it going to be like cater to my needs? When is it going to be, I want to do this? And so we deal with a lot with guilt. And I know we're going to come up on the guilt situation later, but there are definitely times that we just have to divide and conquer and figure out who's doing what. And
we said earlier that he loves things Disney, Mickey Mouse is his favorite. So since we were going to New York, both of our girls have done some theater, so they wanted to go to Broadway. So then we're like, okay, what show do we go to? We decided to go to Lion King because that's the one we thought he was most likely to enjoy.
Yes.
But when you're making these, like,
the girls wanted to see something else, so it was like, well.
So we did all go to Lion King as a family. And for the most part, it went really good. But as soon as like, Jameson and I, as soon as the main part of the play was done, we went outside, right? He had been sitting too long, quiet too long. We missed the callback.
It was night, like it was 7:00 when it started. So it was getting close to 9, and he was done. And so, and I get it.
Did I wait for you outside, or did we just even go back separate?
I don't even remember.
But then the next night, the girls wanted to see something else. And so just Allison and the girls that night went to go see Wicked. And again, I was happy to not force Jameson to do it, but there's just things that we miss out. So now when Allison and the girls talk about Wicked, that's just something that I didn't get to be a part of. I spent some time in Central Park with the girls, and they will be talking about getting boba tea at this place, and Allison wasn't there. So the older that he gets, the harder it is to know how to do this as a family. And then we just have to make decisions like, what sorts of trips do we try to do this? We all love to be outside and hike, but Jameson's not like a great hiking person and doesn't enjoy it. And so
we went to, it was Gatlinburg and kind of like the Smokies, and I love it down there, and I love hiking. And I remember that we went on a hike, and I think it was a 5-mile hike, and we were getting towards the end. And so we had to park really far away to get to this hike. So Kevin had originally dropped us off, and then he went and parked and then came back, hiked back to us, and then we all hiked together. So he kind of went ahead to go get the car to bring it back to the parking lot. And I just remember we would take 10 steps, and Jameson would find a rock, and he's like, can I sit down now? And I'm like, it got to the point, like the last half mile, we did that like every 10 steps. And I'm like, but I can see the parking lot. You just need to push just a little bit further. We can't stop. The parking lots are right there. So that was a little bit of a challenge because
that was when we probably pushed him too hard on.
Yeah.
But you want to try to have these experiences as a family, and knowing at the start of a hike how long he's going to be able to do.
And there are times that Jameson would say he didn't want to do something. And there are times that we like accept that. And there are other times that we're like, well, we all have to do things we don't necessarily want to do. And there are times that we're like, but I think he would really enjoy this if he did do it. And so we would make him do certain things, and he will talk about those things fondly now. And like he did like doing some of those things, but at the time he did not want to. So we also have to balance, when does he get to have that like say in what he gets to do, and when do we have to push him a little bit harder to be like, all right, let's do something that I think you're going to really enjoy. And sometimes it's backfired on us and he did not really enjoy it. So I was thinking about FAO Schwartz. I think he would have loved it, but he found a toy that he wanted within the first 5 minutes of being there. And once he found that, he was done and he did not want to do anything else.
And the place is just so loud and so much energy. He just got overstimulated, and we literally could not get out of the store fast enough.
Yes. So like we had to buy it. This was one of those we divided and conquered. And I will say, the one thing I appreciated about New York is that I felt like people were very maybe open or like accepting. So I remember this time we got on the train together and he's sobbing. Jameson is just sobbing. And nobody was like looking at it strangely. Like one lady's like, oh, you want to sit here? Like everybody was like super understanding. It was never like, oh, I can't believe, like, or like just staring at him like, you know, something was wrong. I mean, obviously something was wrong with him, but it was never, I don't think there was like a lot of judgment in what people, and people were just so accommodating. I was just like, you could tell that people wanted to help, but they weren't going to like push themselves in, but they were going to be like, hey, would you like to sit here? You know, or like I would find a seat for him and there was somebody, you know, like, because the trains would get crowded. Like I would find a seat for him and then somebody else would get up and like, why don't you sit here with him? Like, so people were just so accommodating to him there. And I don't know if that's always the case or if it's just, I think New York has it's a different kind of place. I love the city personally. I think it's, and you know, people talk about New Yorkers being rude. I've never experienced New Yorkers being rude. I've only experienced them being annoyed with you stopping in the middle of the street to look at your map, but they've never been rude because like pushing you out of the way. They've always been so like accepting or accommodating to people who look like they are in need. At least that's what I experienced.
And I suspect part of it is when you live in a very diverse city and you realize the diversity of experiences and the diversity of life backgrounds and all that kind of stuff. Even if you don't understand this particular type of diversity, it's easier for you to navigate with, right? Yeah. So if you're used to seeing people of all different sorts of races, all different sexualities, sexual expressions, languages, whatnot, then to have a, you know, somewhat verbal but not super communicative teenager who is crying on the subway, like it's just not the spectacle that it can be in smaller towns.
Yeah.
I think that maybe that's what it was about traveling for us too, because you're in an area, we would always go to the tourist areas. So people were used to seeing people with disabilities.
And if Jameson does something that is socially unexpected in another city where we're not going to be, you know, like, oops, sorry. You know, if he gets frustrated or overwhelmed and, you know, like throws his glass in another restaurant, like it's not great. He did this on Taco Bell driving back from New York. Like, you know, we picked it up and got him out of there, but it's different when you're not going to also see those people at work or the next week or something like that. There's a kind of anonymity sometimes when you're not in your normal spots that is just familiar.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked a lot about the challenges that you've faced. Do you have a favorite family memory, something happy
that you'd like to end this on?
Jameson loves food. One of our favorite places ever is this covered market in Barcelona, where we would just try things from all the different stalls. Jameson's eating empanadas and dragon fruit and a fresh smoothie and all this kind of stuff. Just from street vendors. The kids still talk about that.
Yes,
Jameson will sometimes talk about the covered market. And I mean, we just have pictures of him at the Tower of London when he's young, or him up on the Eiffel Tower, me up in the Eiffel Tower, hating every second of it.
He stands along the wall. It's great.
So the fact that he's been able to do some of this stuff, and that our family has been able to do it together, even though complicatedly.
We did go to Disney World. We've been there a couple times. The first one, he was very young. Actually, he's been there 3 times. He went to Disneyland, then Disney World, and then Disney World. And that was good, though it was during the pandemic. So it was towards the end of the pandemic. So it was still difficult, and there was a lot of walking, but like there were things that we made him do that I think he enjoyed doing. Like there were certain roller coasters that he would go on that he would say he didn't want to, but then he would go on them. He's like, can we go on that again? And then there was one he definitely did not want to go back on. But like there was one that he just loved. I think it was when we were at Universal. So
he loved the Spider-Man one.
Oh yeah.
But he loved one of the Harry Potter ones.
And it was one of the Harry Potter ones that made me sick. And I'm like going, it's okay. I can make it through this one. Like, I don't do anything that swings well but we went on that. So he would just ask to go on it over and over again. And I'm like, okay, this is like, I'm glad that he got to do this thing. So I don't know if that there's one experience. I think it's just that there's usually an experience in every vacation that like, this made it worth it. Right.
Well, thank you so much for your openness and your honesty in sharing all of this with our listeners. Next time, we're going to talk about guilt. So I will see. I know. So I will see you next time.
That's good. Thank you.
Thanks, RuthAnn.